Welcome to the Adarsh Yoga Podcast. My name is Adarsh Williams. Here I share meditations, classes, and conversations about the vast topic of yoga. This week I am joined by Nika Carlson at Nika Yogini on Instagram for a friendly discussion about her experience as a high level yogi. She's into the Ashtanga third series, as well as being a competitive bodybuilder. She has a meet coming up next weekend. We will address some of the myths and superstitions that we hear about strength training from the yoga world, discuss the surprising similarity in both disciplines, and advice for yogis that are interested in improving their practice by getting stronger. Please enjoy this conversation and don't forget to subscribe to the pod, rate, and review on iTunes. Thanks. Nika, if you could tell just a little bit about your current practice, your training for a competition, and how yoga's fitting in with everything. And also, I'm curious, I assume these things change throughout. You have seasons, it sounds like. And these are probably not concepts that the normal yoga person is probably thinking about, right? So just tell me a little bit about what you're doing now, what your yoga's like, what your strength training is like.
Yeah. So kind of when I'm at this point where I'm kind of in competition shape, I'm not really lifting at the gym to make gains, also because I'm in a calorie deficit to try to lean out, because it's aesthetic bodybuilding, right? So um, at this point, I'm trying to maintain as much of my strength as I can in the gym. And I'm lifting about 5 days. Yeah, I went to a 5 day split a few months ago just because it was just my energy was getting low. So I'm on a 5 day split. And then because I'm so close to competing, well, have been competing for the last month and then have one more, and we're trying to kind of lean out a little bit more, I'm doing 60 minutes of low intensity cardio every day. So that's the big time suck right now. Like in the rest of the year when I'm not trying to cut weight, in fact, when I'm trying to gain weight on purpose, like cardio is pretty low, 3 sessions, 30 minutes, super easy to work into your day. But at this point, it's my gym time is easily a little over 2 hours because like depending on how busy the gym is, if the gym is not busy, I can finish my lift in about 45 to 50 minutes, if not, a little longer. And then my cardio is an hour plus like commuting there. And then my practice, this is the first time. So I took 5 years off competing from 2015 to 2020 and then came back last year and then competed last year and this year. And this is the first time that I've actually like scaled back my practice a little bit, mostly to accommodate like energy. So right now I'm practicing about 5 days a week instead of six, and two of those, 2 to 3, depending on how I'm feeling, are partial practices. And so I'll do like half of a series, and I haven't like depends on how I'm feeling that day which series I do, but I will do all three series in the week at least once full. So I'll do a primary, do a second, I'll do third. Um, and I haven't found that, I think so, there's this weird thing of like, if you don't do it every day, you're not gonna be able. I'm like, well, but you know, I find that your body remembers. Like it's one thing to like discontinue your practice for, months and weeks at a time. And it's another thing to just have 1 or 2 more days off than you normally do. And I think part of for me, my philosophy around it is like the reasons that I practice yoga are very different than the reasons that I lift and compete. Lift and compete are almost two separate categories because you can still, there's bodybuilding, like the time in the gym, and then there's like the competing part. And I think there's different personas for like each of those things. But I found that like as long as I'm still getting like the fruits of what I seek from my practice, then it's practice and it's still fully beneficial and it will be there. When my gym time dies down in a month, I'm really actually excited to kind of do more full complete practices through the week and have the energy for that. So and those are things to kind of look forward to. But I think we have to remember that like we practice to support our life, right? I don't live to practice. I practice because it makes my life more livable. And I think like as long as I'm cognizant of that, then it's not something that I think of like, oh, well, am I a bad yogi because I've reduced, I'm not doing third 4 days a week and then a second and like, the beauty of the practice is it's there every day.
Definitely. So much is there I need to ask you about. So first of all, what are splits? What do you mean by that?
So on the days that I lift, depending on what days of the week it is, I lift certain body parts. Also, it's a way to have other body parts recover, right? So like if you
Yeah.
were to lift like your whole body every day of the week, then none of your body parts have a chance to recover. I know that you know this, but I'm guessing you're asking for the people listening or watching. So the way that I have it, some people like to do push and pull days. I just kind of break out my body parts and I try to hit my whole body twice in a week.
Mhm.
So I would say like one day I would do back and shoulders, and then so that I'm hitting those two body parts once. Another day I would do a leg day, and then I may emphasize like quads versus hamstrings on that day, as in I do more exercises toward them, but I'll do the whole leg set together. I'll do a chest and arms day, and then that's three, and then the other 2 days I'll just do a lower body, upper body. So then I hit everything twice in the cycle of a week.
Yeah. Do you treat your yoga kind of like that? If you're doing first, second, third series, that you're kind of breaking it up to hit those different body parts?
No, I mostly do it based a little bit on time. Uh, time is a big one because sometimes I'll practice in the middle of the day and I'll be like, oh darn, I have a meeting, a work meeting, so I better wrap it up and do something quick, and then I'll decide what to practice. Sometimes it's also just based off of how I'm feeling. Um, but I mean, I tend to do like my advanced practice more frequently, but I also kind of, the days that I feel like, oh, I could take a break, that's also a great day to say, I'm going to do primary today.
Yeah, yeah. I have recently sort of re-fallen in love with primary series. So it's, in a way, it's kind of harder because you have to lift up and jump back so much,
There's so
So
many vinyasas.
yes, secretly very difficult, right? So
It is. I feel different when I do primary. I'm like, there's not that many in third.
yeah, and I've actually, and this is a bit of a sidebar, but I've actually been thinking of primary in terms of body composition lately, and I've really been thinking of kind of the detox and, honestly, I've been like working on app stuff. So I've been thinking like, oh, this is kind of good. I can actually like really massage into this area, and then I can do like
Hmm.
a ton of additional ab work, and then I try to find all the little places in the primary series that there's additional work to be done. Do you ever apply that attitude of, oh, I could work on my biceps during, I don't know, this chaturanga? Do you ever think about that?
No, actually, mostly like especially primary. I have like this recurring on and off thing on my right, like SI kind of sciatica type of thing that comes and goes. And it's not like people are like, oh, are you hurting yourself from all that forward folding in yoga? I'm like, it is not yoga's fault. It is not the gym's fault. It's probably because of the way that I sit the other hours of the day that I'm not, doing stuff. And I also notice it just comes and goes. It just decides to leave. And so I tend to notice like I use that as something to inform me. So when especially in primary, because all the forward folding right now, it doesn't bother me on that right side till I put my leg behind my head, but all the forward folding drives it nuts. And it's not a hamstring. I can tell by the way that it engages the muscle. I'm not at risk of actually tearing or pulling it. It just is talking the whole time. It's kind of like it feels like it's going to pull, but based on the health of the muscle, I know the muscle is healthy enough to take the forward fold. It's just like a resistance. It's like a mobility hinging thing because I've seen my chiropractor about it, and then it just decides to go away a few months of the year and then comes back. And so I just
Yeah.
use it throughout my practice. And so those are kind of more in terms of like how I use my practice to focus on any kind of like body parts or things like that. I mostly apply it to like functional movements,
Mhm.
less about specific muscle groups or how I'm using them.
Yeah. I think the functional movement, functional strength part is sort of how I bridge the gap between strength stuff and yoga stuff. That's interesting, though. It sounds to me like your yoga is really like your meditative practice. And I definitely think about that. You know, it's normally not so body focused, it's really the body as a vehicle sort of thing. And I think that's why the attitude can be much more relaxed with yoga about, like, yeah, today it's a half practice day or whatever. You know, I'm doing a yoga sort of potpourri. I need to touch certain corners and feel certain like stretches or releases in order to
Mm-hmm.
you know, get through my life. So okay, I think that's really good. What kind of cardio training are you doing right now?
So boring, especially as an
Uh-huh.
ex-runner. I'm either on like a stair climber or a stair mill for an
Mhm.
hour, or I'm like on an incline treadmill, and then I just aim for a heart rate range. No, so it's kind of like dull and repetitive and boring, because the
Yeah.
time just increases and then the frequency of it increases. And like, what's nice though is it's low intensity, so I can hold a conversation. I've taken work meetings on the
Yeah.
treadmill. I'll watch TV on it, and I'm just on
Yeah.
an incline and I'm just walking, and then I'm just making sure that my heart rate's kind of in that low intensity window, like 115 to 130,
Mm.
and then it's just for a really really long time. It is the least exciting exciting part.
Yeah, that's interesting. Would you be able to kind of do yoga as your cardio, like do it really fast? Would you be able to? Is
So I
that
think I
possible?
mentioned it. I mean, kind of, but I think like I first started like I did yoga in the I don't know. I started doing yoga like a little over maybe 12 years ago, but I didn't start Ashtanga till 20 very early 2015. I think January 2015 is when I started, and I was actually competing then, right? And so because yoga was new for me, actually we my coaches ended up reducing my cardio because um when I was doing yoga plus the gym plus the lifting, the gym and cardio, lifting and cardio, and then I was in a deficit, I plateaued, and they're like, what's going on? And then I had just added this like this new to my body daily thing. And so we actually did reduce my cardio, and I was still doing cardio, but yoga did act as a supplement. Many years later though, um yoga, because I do it so regularly, and it's the same practice,
Yeah,
it's the
your
same pose,
body has
is
adapted.
efficient,
Yeah.
absolutely. And so it is unfortunately pretty much part of like my NEAT activity or my
Yeah.
non-exercise active
Right.
time. And so what sucks is when I'm tired and I reduce my practice or don't or take a rest day, that actually negatively impacts me because it's a regular activity that my body it's built into its
Mm.
baseline.
Yeah.
But yet doing it is not benefiting it at all. So it's almost like, oh, I got this, I have to do this extra thing, or else it will negatively affect like how my body uses it. So yeah, at this point, no, it's just built in. It's like walking to your office.
Perhaps it's good for yogis to do some type of crossover training or vary their yoga practice to avoid that adaptation response.
Yeah, I think if somebody is doing their practice as both meditative and as a form of exercise, and they're fine with it being, maintaining themselves, that's cool. Then you don't need to really change it up. But if you're trying to, if you're like, oh, I'd like to drop a few pounds, or my doctor said I should lose a little bit, unfortunately, if your body's so used to this thing, it's not, it's still really good for you mentally and not bad for you physically, obviously, but you're going to have to do something else, because unfortunately the body is too smart and has figured out, oh, we're doing that thing that this crazy person does every day. Okay, and it's just kind of built in.
I could not agree with you more, but I sense that a lot of folks have maybe not considered that. You know, I always joke that yoga is exercise for lazy people. Um, and I'm just kidding, you know, but it's kind of true. Even Ashtanga, right? Because like you were suggesting, you just get kind of used to doing it. It's like, yeah, I do this. It's not particular, it's hard, but it's not particularly hard, right? It's as hard as like commuting to work. That sucks. So I
Yeah.
think
But
there's,
also in your practice, your whole goal is actually efficiency when you think about it, not in
yeah,
the yoga terms, but when as you're learning each posture, it's like, well, wait till strive for steady breath, right? Series Ashtanga. So you're like, okay, steady. It's still difficult. Did I freeze? There I am, or there you are. Yeah. So like, we're taught that, okay, find steadiness in every posture. And the way that you find steadiness is how's your breath? And when your breath is long and even, you're not exerting as much effort. Or when you're able to, well, the best skill set you get from yoga is the fact that you're, even when something is hard, you're capable of steadying yourself, which then steadies your pulse, which then, all the things we're taught to do is find steadiness. And so when you're finding steadiness, then you're not getting a cardio workout. You're not, your whole goal is to make your practice something that's not as exertive as it obviously naturally is.
Yeah. So do you apply that then to your strength training or to your cardio? Are there natural carryovers for you?
Yes and no. So Mula Bandha is huge. Actually, I grew up singing, and I was an opera singer, and it's funny because it's like my voice teacher in my 20s was like, you have to sing from your crotch. And
Mm.
it was later when I was doing yoga, I was like, oh, this makes so much more sense because it's so grounding. And I think like before like a big deadlift, you kind of like want to ground yourself, pull the slack out of the bar, and then like, give it everything and lift up, but try to do it safely. And I think there's definitely bandha aspects that I think are helpful. Breathing wise, it's opposite for me. And I was lifting before I had done yoga, like ever back, years ago. And so I had to learn that, right? Because usually when you're lifting, it's when you exert the effort is when you exhale. Whereas in yoga, it's more directionally driven, right? So it's like exhale, forward fold, inhale,
Yep.
halfway up. So when it's
Yep.
up, it's inhale. And that's not necessarily true. I mean, using the forward fold and halfway up, that would be your deadlift motion, right? And that's the opposite way that I would breathe because you exert when you lift. So you exhale on the lift. But so the breathing patterns are different, but I'm very mindful of how I breathe in both practices, if that makes sense. And I think that's like more of a philosophical carryover.
Sure. And my impression after conversations with kind of gym folk or strength folk is that they don't always prioritize breathing. So for you to think more implicitly about it is probably unique in the gym. I'm sure the high level people are talking about it. And I'm curious, do you apply nasal breathing or mouth breathing in the gym?
Oh, I will exhale through my mouth, but I inhale through my nose. I had to think about that. I was trying to think. Or if like with the masks on right now, it's like doesn't even. What's great about the mask is I can make whatever exertion face I want. No one can see what I look like under my mask at the gym while I'm like grunting. And if I don't exhale through my mouth, like when I like exert a lift, then it's like quasi. Now that I think about it, it's quasi ujjayi exhale because it's still audible through my nose if I exhale through my nose.
Yeah.
During an effort.
Yeah, I definitely have thoughts about that. You know, I see and hear people at the gym who are breathing poorly and have bad mechanics. Overall, I would say my current gym, you know, people are training at a very high level and it's quite functional and kind of inspiring in that sense. But I'm never sure when I see the guy over there like grunting and just like everything is just to me blowing apart. It doesn't look healthy and it doesn't translate to like, I don't know, a better physique if that's their goal, or more strength if it's their goal. It just doesn't seem to add up to much. But I don't hear a lot of emphasis on really proper breathing and proper kind of pressurizing, I guess would be the language. You know, I'm sure your
Bracing,
coaches,
yeah.
yes, I'm sure your coaches are all about that stuff. So since you kind of moved from the strength world into the yoga world, did those things naturally click for you? Like you walked in, you heard Mula Bandha and you were like, oh yeah.
No, so I think I mentioned to you that like I'd started running and then I had like knee injuries starting to come. I actually did decent volume for a while before it started affecting me. And so, some people are just built like greyhounds and meant to run these long distances. And I liked running long distances, but I would say I'm not built for that.
Yep.
And so I was running, easily 50 plus miles a week. And it wasn't the volume per week that was affecting me. It was the long run. So anything over about 13 to 15 miles, my form would drop off, and then my knee would start acting up. And so in my mind, I guess I had this philosophically. My mind is always longevity, right?
Yep.
Even in my early 20s, I thought, well, if you do something every day, whatever that is, in theory, you could be like 70 and do it because you did it yesterday, And so I thought, but I not if I have an injured knee. And so I started lifting. So running was my main driving force. I loved running, and I thought, okay. And then my husband was actually a sprinter. When he was in high school, he was cross country, and then in college he ran on a sprint squad. And so, he was very familiar with the gym and using and lifting and things like that. And I said, my knee is bothering me. And he's like, well, you could try lifting legs to try to support, build up the muscles that support the knee. And so I started lifting for my running. And then somebody else had suggested you could try yoga for your knee. So I did that at the same time.
Yeah, the
But
kitchen sink
everything was,
approach.
yeah. But my motivation was purely like, how can I add more longevity to my running? And then I went to my first, like, some kind of yoga flow class in Long Beach. And I was just kind of hooked on the feeling that's similar to the runner's high feeling, but yet without as much effort. And at the end of practice, I'm like laying there, I'm like, oh, everything's kind of just quiet and kind of fuzzy, and this is nice. And so that's kind of how I started to really like yoga. So that's kind of how I discovered them together. So both of the motivation was, how do I improve my running with this lifting thing and with this yoga thing?
Yeah.
um yeah.
I think that makes sense. I came to strength training through injury as well, and that's completely relatable to me. And it sounds like since your interest in strength and yoga sort of grew together, right? So I'm sure there's always been some natural overlap in that. So was your husband specifically training strength for his running, or was that just something coincidental?
I think, yeah, because he's not a competitor. He's not like trying to bodybuild. He just lifts like for health and maintenance
Yeah,
and
but
strength.
back in the
But
day
back
his
in the
running
day,
career, yeah,
yeah, yeah. So like at Berkeley, there's like a gym facility for all the athletes, and so they're all in the gym. So it's very
yeah,
common that a lot of the runners lift. And so I would guess that it's probably primarily targeted functionally to support
yeah.
their running.
I think so. I think since probably like the 90s and Michael Jordan, and really embracing strength training, I think that all sports, whether it's obviously football, but definitely basketball, running, all sports have shifted toward, hey, if you want to get better at your sport, you get stronger because stronger is going to make you better. But I
Hmm.
haven't always seen that overlap with the serious yoga folks. I think about that. I secretly have met a couple of people who strength train to supplement their yoga. And like you,
Closet strength trainers.
but it's infrequent. I think there is a lot of, you know, kind of myths or whatever coming out of the yoga world, especially the really hardcore Ashtangis, who we're both most familiar with that type of groupthink. And hey, I'm part of the group as much as anyone else, so I don't want to, sort of spit on this type of thinking. But and I definitely, I came to strength as like a 39-year-old, so it was definitely a late thing for me as well. But I don't think a lot of yoga people probably realize that strength training could make their yoga better, or at least that's my point of view. What do you think?
Yes, in all of the things you said, yes. I think I'm trying to think of where the best place to start there is. I think when we met at your studio in Monterey, and we ended up, I was so excited to meet you because you was actually the first person, especially teacher, that I had met that had such a strong knowledge and interest. And you were doing a lot of the mobility, the joint mobility stuff, and you were lifting. And we ended up talking for like an hour plus after practice. And I was like, this is the first Ashtangi. I'm just kind of like, anybody really, but because I think of it as like, I'm not a gymnast. I wish I was. I think I partially initially got attracted to Ashtanga because as a small child, I had dreams of like doing gymnastics, not the Olympics, just being able to do gymnastics. And single parent, latchkey kid, couldn't afford that stuff. So I think I kind of like particularly got drawn to Ashtanga because of the cool dynamics of the physicality of it. But I also had seen, had watched enough gymnastics on TV to see that these people are really flexible and they're really strong. And so they don't need to be like one or the other, right? And yes, by like I think I was listening to like Simone Biles or somebody doing an interview, and she's like, as a gymnast, I'm not even that flexible. But if you look at her compared to, she can do like if she wanted to do the practice, she could do it. She has enough flexibility. And so there's that balance, right? Now, some people, yes, are naturally more flexible. But even when she's saying, as a gymnast, by the definitions of flexibility, I'm not that flexible, right? I'm like, okay, but as for what I need to do the practice, she has enough strength and enough flexibility that you can do both. And so I thought it was the weirdest thing, like, how much I'd heard stories of like Tatabi Joy saying, don't do these extra things. When I went to Mysore, I heard Sharat say, like, don't surf as much, don't ride your bikes as much. And I'm like, okay, am I living for the practice, or is the practice serving me if I'm going to not do these things? And so that's kind of where I fall on that. Like, I don't think that they're opposing of each other. Yes, you may have some slight flexibility limitations as you get stronger, but like how much? You know what I mean? Like if you can still do the thing, like unless you're trying to be a contortionist, do you really need that extra, millimeter or not of flexibility to have that balance? And then I think the other cool thing about like having knowledge of your anatomy, how your muscles kind of work together, and doing a lot of lifting is there's so much strength in the practice beyond flexibility. And this is a misconception the other way too. Like I had a lifting friend of mine see a picture of me with like, a capotta with my leg behind my head. And they're like, you're so flexible. I'm like, well, so yes, there's hip flexibility required, right? To get it there. But once you put your leg behind your head, that's heavy. and and also then you're trying, it doesn't matter what you look like in the photo or whatever, you're striving to erect your spine with your leg behind your head. That's essentially, if you're going to go to, weightlifting world, that's a good morning, right? That's a
Totally.
back extension. And so I think like that's where, and that actually helped me because I actually, well, when you met me, I was starting third series, and but my Akapata segments in second, leg behind head was like something that's like it was very hard for me. It still is, regardless of whatever the hell it looks like now. And people are like, oh, it looks like great. I'm like, yeah, but it is hard for me every day. Because it's just one of those things. Everybody has it, right? Somebody will think a pose is easy, someone will think a pose is hard. That's the other thing I love about the practice, is it's so unique to you, and you can kind of appreciate how hard or easy something is relative
Yeah.
to like your body type, right? So
Everyone will have
for
their
me,
challenge. Yeah.
yeah. And so for me, like leg behind the head was always something that's like that. And for me, the strength part actually helped, because if I was purely going to try to rely on my flexibility to do leg behind the head, then I'd still have my leg here and be like, in like this crouched position, because I'd only be focusing on the hip, right? But because I'm kind of like, oh, there's so many more pieces and so many places to get leverage,
Yeah.
to self-assist yourself so that you can kind of become erect, so that you can open that hip more. There's so much, places to basically, yeah, just to use leverage. I mean, back to like your initial point, it's like, do people think that like strength training and yoga don't? I think that there's so much information from both, because of just how you understand your body, your just proprioception in general, your self-awareness in space. A lot of that is just true. So I think there's a lot of misconceptions with flexibility, because when you're bending something, you're flexing the other counteractive part, right? So
Yep.
it also helps. It's also why, back bends are harder the day after a chest day because everything's pulling this way. But at the same time, sometimes my back bends are better after a back day, even though my back is sore, because it's particularly kind of primed for
Yes,
using those muscles. And I
precisely.
practice sore all the time. I think that's the other one, is like some people are like, well, but I don't want to be sore for practice. I'm like, well, sure, but I mean, I practice sore all the time, and it's not from the practice. And yes, it will tighten, but also it give it a couple of days and it'll loosen back up. Like it's I don't
It,
know. I think it's just okay. I don't
it'll
have a yoga competition I'm training for, so it doesn't really matter.
it'll loosen stronger too. I'll, just to give a shout out to my friend Matt in Monterey. He, was a longtime Bikram yogi. He started coming to Ashtanga with me around the time we met. And he became my gym buddy, and we would just go every day and we would strength train. And it was really like we were these yoga dudes, but we were thinking about how to improve our yoga through strength training. And it was incredible to see his gains. My body got bigger, but I'd kind of done a bunch of poses. Well, his body got bigger, stronger, and way more like flexible, or, more specifically, greater mobility. But those hamstrings, rather than just getting pulled upon all the time, were now getting stronger, right? He's getting a butt, those muscles are starting to pump up a little bit. And it's amazing what gains can come. And I do see that a lot when I kind of look around the yoga world. I'm like, well, your body's kind of deconditioned. So you to now try to, do this extreme pose is probably not a good idea.
Hmm.
You're not kind of pre-athletic. So I think that that's a big challenge in the yoga community that might not be so obvious, is this idea that actually maybe I do need to do some type of functional training to improve this extreme yoga that I'm attempting.
I'm also surprised that more people don't kind of eventually, maybe not necessarily end up in strength training on their own, but in general with the mindset of like, maybe I need to do something else as well,
Yeah,
only because our practice is repetitive. It's just,
yeah,
the movements are so repetitive. And so we already know this from carpal tunnel and anything else, is that too much repetition is going to eventually, it's like a rubber band, right? Or a paper clip that you like bend back and forth. It's going to have its own impact regardless of how good for you the practice as a whole is. And so I'm surprised more people don't kind of just start to explore ways, even if the number one priority for you is practice, right? How do I prolong my practice? How do I prevent repetitive injury because of my practice by doing something else on the outside? So it does surprise me sometimes that like when people just don't try anything else. But
yeah.
again, if their motivation for their practice is purely spiritual, but I think a lot of people, they use it as a twofer. And I also think I also met enough yoga people where I'm like, I don't know. You sound like you approach your yoga practice like it's the gym. You know what I mean? Where it's kind of like, well, I don't eat after 5, and I do, and I'm like, but why? Right? Like I apply these rules in my competing because I have a specific date and a specific goal, and there's a finish line. But with my practice, there's no finish line. So I don't I don't understand like this like strictness around the outside of your practice, for your practice. Maybe that doesn't resonate with me as much. I don't eat after 5 o'clock so that I have an empty stomach in the morning. I'm like, you know what, like I had a banana before practice yesterday, like whatever. It's not like I had like such a big breakfast that like I can't move anymore, but I don't feel like my stomach needs to be completely empty to
Actually,
do
yogis
it.
don't eat bananas, they drink coffee. That is the performance
I'm drinking
enhancing.
coffee as well.
I think that some of what we run into is just like probably like old information or bad information or irrelevant information. It's like, I remember one thing I would hear in Mysore is that you don't want to walk too much because walking too much will make you stiff for yoga. And that's maybe true, but
It's a
it
little true. I'm
seems
on the treadmill a lot.
Yeah, and I'm not sure if that actually equates to like health either. You know, to me, walking and running, you know, to be honest, seem like very normal kind of human activities. And yeah, so you kind of hear these weird things that kind of pop out of yoga superstition. By the way, you know, I'm definitely the guy who was very interested in, you know, learning all those things and hearing all those stories because they sound so interesting. And then you're applying it to
Me
your
too.
life and it's like, it's a moon day, you know, and so you're doing these things. And again, there's a lot of reason to apply that. However, it's not always sort of encased in enough context or enough sort of like what if I would do the opposite attitude, you know, that sometimes we do need to experiment
The
a little bit.
Pratipaksha Bhavana.
Yeah,
Do the
yeah.
opposite.
So you know, I think that this idea around sort of yoga as a twofer, I think is really great. But I think that you're absolutely right, is that it's not quite accurate. I think that yoga goes squarely into the camp of like a spiritual meditative practice. If you want to do the training part, then yoga, there's some training there, obviously, and it's going to do things for your internal body, right? Thinking about yoga and weight loss, right? If someone wanted to lose some calories by doing yoga, they would probably do things like shoulder stand to stimulate certain hormonal systems rather than cardio, right? So it'd be a bit of a different approach or attitude. So it isn't to poo-poo yoga at all, but I do think
Yeah,
that
but also
there's
like you said, they change it up. If you were doing yoga purely as like, I want to lose some weight, right? You're doing it as exercise. I mean, I view it as like yoga happens to be exercise, right? And you can do it that way, but that's not why most of us do it. But I think if your goal was to treat it as an exercise for like weight loss, or like how some people go to the gym and use the ellipticals or whatever, then you can't do the same practice every day, because just like the people who are year round on the elliptical and nothing's happening anymore is because they've adapted. So if someone's goal is using yoga as a weight loss tool, I don't think Ashtanga would work short term as your body gets used to it, and then it's not going to work anymore.
Yeah, and I would say that again, I was sort of talking about primary series as a way to sort of detox the body and so forth. I do think that there's a lot of that stuff that's baked into it.
Mm-hmm.
And I do think there's ways to change up the practice, you know, like I was saying, sometimes go fast. You know, what I've gotten into lately is I've been wearing a weight vest during my yoga practice, and that's been a really interesting way to
Oh,
like,
what a cool idea!
I thought you might like that. Put on like, you know, your 10, 20 kilos, and especially if you get it to fit snugly.
I want to try that. So I kind of have done that, but not with a vest. So before I started cutting for this competition, I went through a gain phase. So from December through last December, when I finished my competition season, through May, I intentionally put on about 12 pounds. And I was practicing the whole time. And it's funny because my teacher, Devora, she's so great because she knows what I'm doing, right? And so she's like, it's so interesting to see how your practice is changing as I'm gaining weight, but I'm gaining it gradually. So a lot of the things, like if I threw on a vest, right? Like that's like boom, here's another extra 10 pounds overnight. A lot of your practice is gonna be hard because it's like, okay, I just gained 10 pounds overnight. But when you're gaining like half a pound to a pound every other week or so,
Yeah.
it's subtle and it actually allows you to get the strength slowly to keep doing your stuff. Um, and then I also noticed, and I had to let it go. Like, there's twisting became harder because it is a thing. And and but I also was purposely gaining weight, like this is self-inflicted. And so
Yeah.
I could still bind, but it was harder. And I don't necessarily think that that's bad, because it gives you an appreciation for like what you're doing, right? Or like my I go into headstand and then flip over, and then kind of coming back out of exiting that pose. I was exiting that pose really consistently, and then as I started gaining weight, exiting became harder. And it wasn't just due to the weight; it's because I couldn't compensate with my lightness anymore. The fact that my upper back is tight. So actually, it's like to highlight places that need growth. But that does mean like, but somebody could say, well, I don't want to gain 12 pounds because then I can't do my practice. I'm like, yeah, but there's not to say that there's not some benefit of practice, because if you're light, everything's just easier. So now I'm learning to find strength with it. But I like the notion of your vest because it would require, it's not gradual. It would just be like that much more effort in the
Yeah,
moment and presence.
the problem is the distribution thing, because when you're talking about gaining, overall 10 pounds, you're putting some of that in like your fingers, I guess. So when you put on the weight vest, it's kind of isolated there. But there's all versions of that. I have like, all the leg weights, and I'll definitely like, hold a thing, just because it's like, for kind of a stiff guy, relatively stiff guy like me, if I hold a dumbbell, all of a sudden I've got a little leverage for doing some of these poses. So there's a lot of upside, I think, to that type of prop in yoga. But I'm always experimenting. So I've never been one to shy away from the experiment of yoga. And finding variety in that practice too, because there is a lot
the
of
research.
sameness.
Everybody's forgetting about the research and the practice.
That used to be the name
I
of the
love that you
school.
do that.
It used to be the
Yeah,
name of the
exactly.
school.
And now it's like you have to do it like this, or it's not. I don't know. I like the non-dogmatic
Yeah,
approach, right?
totally.
It's just
Yeah,
a
yeah.
very different one.
Yeah, yeah. I think that certain things, not just yoga, but just in general, I think as things evolve, they become more codified, more set in stone, as it were. And I can understand that in terms of creating standards and so forth. And I think there's a lot of upside to it, but obviously it creates weird problems and just little, group thinks that don't necessarily measure up to, what would be best for everyone. So anyway, having said that, I was thinking that, someone who is interested in, maybe a yoga person who is interested in getting into strength, they might have a hard time starting. I think that going into the gym can be intimidating for people. I don't find the gym to be a very welcoming place, not like the yoga studio where, I always feel at home. Sometimes going to the gym can be a little loud, a little jarring. You have kind of the bro guys there who are pretty intense. But, how do you think for someone who was a yoga person that wanted to get started, how do you think they could approach that? How do you tell your friends to start?
I guess it depends on like where they already are with their own knowledge of like body mechanics. I think the easiest recommendation that I've given to people is like go ahead and try with a trainer, just so that you can understand some basic muscle movements, so somebody can like talk you through it. My coaches right now are purely dietitians, so I do all my own training, but I've been in the gym for such a long time. Um, because I do think that otherwise if you don't know any better, you're going to do like the same three muscle groups like all the time, right? Or you only know like the same three exercises, whereas if you kind of know like these motions flex these muscles, then you can find variations all around the gym that you can use, or you can do compound stuff. But I think the very easy way to just dip your toe in and not have to like stare at the gym. Because I was lucky, because when I first went into the gym, I used my husband because he was versed in the gym. And so I was like, I don't know where to start in this weight room. And so we did a few together. And then he laughed because he's like, yeah, but you do everything, like 1,000%. So basically, I introduced you to some stuff in the gym. And then you're like, okay, this is not enough. And then I found a trainer for initially at first. And then she and I became very good friends. And then I started training myself, with kind of combining, okay, now I know how the equipment works. I understand functionally like how the muscles work and which motions help, work which things. And then so I could deviate from that. But I think as like a training wheels way to just get around the equipment, understand how this stuff works because it's new, is just have, use like the local gym's trainer or a friend to take with you. I've taken friends to the gym who'd not lifted before, but then they get mad at me because they like can't take off their shirt the next morning after chest day.
Yes, I remember the one dude that used to come to my yoga that told me he could not wash his hands after a day of work, or could not wash his face after a day of working out, and I remember being really alarmed by that. was before I started strength training. I was like, good God, that doesn't sound healthy.
Yeah,
But
yeah. But I think
I
that's why
think,
they need to be eased in, because otherwise you go the one day and you're like, I can't move. I can't go back to the gym. It's like, no, no, that's why you need to go back.
yeah, I think my initiation to the gym was really like the worst in the sense that I went with like a couple of like big muscle dudes who had been doing it since college, and there was just so much testosterone to it. And I kind of know how to roll with that. I was like, fine, I'll be kind of like the yoga guy and you can make fun of me or whatever, but I'll sort of roll with that. And I was able to do it. But I would imagine for a lot of people, the atmosphere is so intimidating. I think about that. I see people in the gym, maybe the older person or someone that doesn't look like the bodybuilder. I always think like, I mean, I'm intimidated and I'm like, experienced. I know how to use all the equipment and I know how to put the AirPods on and just go with it. But I think the atmosphere itself can be quite, a lot for people. So I do think about that as an obstacle or a barrier for entry. Maybe yoga people do tend to be a little bit more tenderhearted and they like quiet spaces. So I think that there's room for like the Zen gym. I'm waiting for someone to start that up where there's no like heavy techno music, playing, and it's just really, and no one drops the weight. It's just like super like chill.
I think there's a gym for that. I was traveling and I needed a gym, and so I dropped into had never been to Planet Fitness, and Planet
Planet
Fitness
Fitness
is,
is the Zen gym?
well, I make fun of it because it's the gym that has like signs everywhere that says no dropping weights. Um,
Okay.
and then they're like, this is a judgment free zone, and then they have this thing on the wall clearly judging though the bodybuilding community. So I'm like, oxymoron here.
Right.
Because basically they're like, this is a judgment free zone. But then they had, I forgot what was on the wall, but it said something about like the people carrying around a gallon of water. But like any bodybuilder drinks a gallon of water a day minimum. So
Gotcha.
to offset all that protein intake to keep the kidneys going, like you gotta have enough water. So, but there was like a comment it was like on their wall. It was like, this is a judgment free zone, no dropping weights. And then there was like some kind of name calling of like the types of people that, or a term they used for the people that like carry around water. And I'm like, okay, but go into a CrossFit gym and you're going to drop the weight, like any kind of powerlifting or Olympic lifting thing, you drop the weights, right?
I
Um,
know.
yeah, I know, because I know you spend time in those gyms.
Well, I admit I like the vibe of the CrossFit generally because when you go in there, it feels like a dojo. It feels like a place where some serious shit's going down, and I
And they've
do
got a good
like that.
community.
Yeah,
They've
they
got a
do a
great
great job of.
community.
Yeah, I think the CrossFit does a great job of encapsulating some of the things that yoga just really organically does right, and the community for sure. They're so good about that. And you're on a team, so you're really building that type of thinking where I do think, and I go to the gym by myself. I'm there like early in the
Me
morning when
too.
there's no one there. Except for like a few of the hardcore ladies, right? So we're there doing our thing, and I think that there's something, and I like it because it's quiet. I think that there's something in a
That is
lot
the
of
quiet
gym.
time at the gym.
Yeah, yeah, they don't turn the music up to maximum volume at that time, but I'm personally always bothered by that because any type of loud, noise just throws me off of what I want to do. I mean, I know how to zone it out and just do my thing, but I think oftentimes the atmospheres of these places can be quite off-putting for more sensitive people, where yoga studios are, the right place for someone who is maybe a sensitive person. So I'm always thinking about how to combine both, and I think that's probably like my end goal is something that is like the mindful gym, where there's like a definite yoga feel, sort of that, philosophical background, but there's also a place for strength training and gymnastics training, which I think gymnastics and the gymnasts on Instagram, I think has had the biggest positive influence on yoga in the last like 10 years. Because you see how people are shifting, people who were maybe kind of doing the yoga handstand and it sort of looks like a banana. Now those lines are getting straighter and they are thinking more about these sort of physiological concepts that probably in yoga previously, and not just Ashtanga, but in general, yogis were
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, yoga's not about the anatomy, it's about the bandha, which is not untrue, but there is a practical, there is a body
Yeah, how are you going to
aspect
have
to it.
longevity if you start, if you don't do some emphasis on the alignment and stuff like that so that you can do it for a long time?
Definitely. And I think the longevity piece is really important. And I know for me, that's where strength training came in. There were injuries, and I do think there were just aging issues where building muscle mass and building strength were very good for my overall health. And I've seen that. And I think that's true for everyone. I think for anyone who has been engaged with yoga, let's say for 10 or 20 years, for them to add strength to what they're doing, I think can make a huge improvement. I think it can make their yoga feel better. I think their normal life can feel better. I think how they look naked will be better, right? I think there's nothing but upside. And, that's something I wonder, do you ever look around the yoga room and see people and think like, you could use some strength training? Do you ever want to just like give them a kettlebell or something? And
Sometimes I don't wander too much, and also with the pandemic there's not really like an active MISO room. It's been a long time since there's been a constant active MISO room. I drive up to Devoris to practice, but there's about 4 or 5 of us in there, and it's just nice to breathe together and practice together. But it's also all, the people, I know the people, it's a nice tight community.
yeah,
But yes, I've definitely seen that where as people kind of struggle through things, it's not to say, obviously, like there's modifications to poses and things that you can do to accommodate like some limitations, but also I think being able to, if you could, not necessarily in the yoga room, but suggest like these other external strength things to help them so that they don't injure themselves on the way to kind of getting to the full whatever posture, but unmodified. And I'm not even talking about like twisty pretzel postures, right? Like even just chaturanga, you can kind of see like the struggle there for people who don't have the upper body strength for it, and the body, unfortunately or fortunately, is so intelligent, it will compensate and find other places to sort it out, right? The path of least resistance, and then something else will get injured. So it's kind of like, I get that chaturanga is really important for a primary series because there's so many of them, but at the same time there's so many of them, and so you're doing that over and over, and if you don't actually have the strength necessary to do it, you're probably going to eventually hurt yourself doing so many of them. Whereas we could benefit from like a supplement or something to kind of build up so that the chaturanga itself is like safer to access.
Yeah, I think you're so right about that. I think that oftentimes these things don't have enough context around them, why it's important. It's not always clear how to perform it. I'm not sure that yoga teachers are always as clear about instructing those things as precisely as maybe a coach would, and I'm not sure why that is necessarily. I think sometimes in yoga, there hasn't been enough focus on a practical language around it. I think that sometimes the language is just so mystical and no one knows what a loop or a spiral is. So then how can they like do that in chaturanga? And, I hear a lot of cues that just don't resonate to me. I hear people in Ashtanga, I'll hear like, oh, just relax. And I'm like, actually don't relax. Don't relax. You need to create like, like a bowstring. You need to create this like perfect tension in your body to maintain. At least I do, and I'm doing the
Yeah,
poses.
and I think I know what you're talking about, because if you already know the motion, right, and the physicality of it, then telling you to relax can make sense because you're not going to relax the rest of your body because you know better. But if you're new and you're like, really tight and tense, and somebody tells you to relax, you might relax everything. It's not,
Yeah.
it doesn't translate well unless you explain like, what do you mean by relax? And if what they mean is like unclench your jaw and breathe a little bit, that's not the same thing as relax your body, because then you're
Yeah.
going to get, kind of loosey goosey in whatever the posture is. But it's just so interesting because there's like this different groupings of people who are like, really, you included, is like there's other things you can do to support and supplement And then there's these other groups of people. It's like, no, you just do the practice and you don't do anything else, and you don't do anything preparatory in between. Don't no props, no this, no that. It's like, yeah, but if it's not accessible, someone's going to hurt themselves trying to get to this place. And is that the point, right? Is the point of the practice to do the pose, or is the point of the practice to find yourself a little bit uncomfortable and figure out how to get comfortable there, and then push yourself a little bit more to be a little bit more uncomfortable again?
Totally. And I couldn't agree with you more. And I actually, as a teacher, I get super excited about these ideas around training for and programming specifically to these things. If I have someone that's not capable of doing whatever the pose is, how can I get them to that point? And I can't just say, like, do the practice and all is coming. I have to say, like, oh, these are like the key techniques you need to apply. You need to do this. This is how you need to manage pressure in your body. This is how you do it. It needs to be super simple. Like, they can instantly apply that without having to, like, read a book or Google, some Sanskrit word. They should be able to immediately apply that, and I experiment with my kids with this. I get them to apply things. And if it doesn't work, then it's not effective. But if we can get them doing it right away, then great, and keep it simple. And you can move toward that goal and you can test it. Are you improving? Are you getting better? If I get, like my buddy Matt, and he's been doing Bikram yoga for 6 years and he still can't do a really good forward bend. But if we do some lower body strength training, if we're doing our good mornings and our squats and our deadlift, following like a standard protocol, focus on building strength and building that tissue, hypertrophy, then lo and behold, he's able to, like, totally rock it in a forward bend. To me, that is super satisfying and interesting as a teacher. And it never takes away from Ashtanga. To me, it makes you a better, I call it like the yoga athlete. It makes you a better yoga athlete. You're getting better at that hobby, that thing you're into. And I think it's very rewarding. One thing that you're able to, I think, really see in your practice and your strength training is you're able to see results, right? You're moving toward a competition. And I don't think in yoga we always have that. There is no, like, end point. I'm not getting ready for my Spartan race or my competition. Maybe it's I'm going to Mysore, maybe it's I'm joining up for the TT, but I don't think that people always have these definite goals. It's just kind of like, oh, I'm going to do it without that.
Yeah, well, I think it depends also on, like, how the way you talk about how you like to teach your students and your kids. I think that's something that I wish was more common across teachers, because then you do get the incrementals with it, right? Because it's really hard if, like, just to do something that's like, as an example that's like more obvious, it's like, if all you told me was, okay, jump through, put your leg behind your head, and my leg gets, like, to here, and how do I have incremental, you know what I mean? So then it's like, okay, you can give me pieces of something that kind of lead there, and then I can feel as a student like there's some progress to be made. But if all I'm looking at is point A and point B, and I'm not looking at any of the little places I can get to in between, it's gonna be demotivating, even if the goal isn't the asana. It's not even about, like, the goal is to get to point B and be amazing with my leg behind my head. I think the goal is to feel like you're making progress, right? Everybody wants to make progress, even if point B keeps sliding, it's fine, but, like, you're kind of still having momentum. And if all you see is point B and you're over here, you're like, okay, well, this is so demotivating. I don't know how I'm doing. I also don't know how I'm not going to hurt myself trying to go from here to trying to stick my leg behind my head. But if you have these incremental things, you can get somewhere. So you can, I mean, I don't call it goal setting, because, again, like, I'm not a bad person if I can't get the pose, right? But you still feel like you're making progress, even if the progress is just breathing more consistently, right? So I think probably a personal, like, to draw from a personal example is I was able to finally do Viparita Shalabhasana this year. And but the way that Devora approached that posture for me was, once I got to that pose in third, I would go to the wall. and I'd stand at the wall in, I guess what contortion is called, like moose, where you have your arms at the wall and you're kind of standing there, and I would spend time there. And then I could feel that my back was starting to open. And then at first she would hold me up there, and then and then just try to slowly let me go so I can see, but we didn't focus on me getting up there. Eventually I started using a couple of blankets, and I would walk up the wall because I couldn't jump in. And all of these things, eventually, then I just could do it. And I'm not saying that it's like magical. Ironically, to me, that took me less time than leg behind the head. It took me like 6 months to be able to get into Vipassana Shavasana alone. Whereas my leg wouldn't stay behind my head for a year. So,
Yeah,
so
sure.
every journey is different, but still, like, it was very incremental and small, and I didn't get demotivated by it, but I also wasn't upset by not being able to do it because I had something to work on. And I think as people, if everything's too easy, you lose interest. If everything's too hard, you lose interest. You lose interest because you're like, this is not for me. But something kind of in between where you're challenged is still motivating, and you can make progress with the right approach. But if Devora hadn't approached it that way and was just like, just go in, I don't know what I would do. And I think also when you approach practicing a new posture versus like your regular practice, and I think this is why the research aspect of your practice is really important, is yes, the goal is to do your breathing practice pose by pose by pose with no props and no stalling and blah, blah, blah. But until you get to that point, you can work these postures. That's where the research is, figuring out like, oh, how do I open my back a little bit more? A great tangible example for me was TikToks. I actually learned to TikTok at home during the pandemic last year. I did a lot of ticking, but not a lot of talking.
Oh, I thought you were talking about the app with children.
No, I don't know. No, I meant TikTok and practice. I don't even know how to use the app. But no, so like I would, we were working on it in the shala before the pandemic, but there was no, in my mind, like from when we stopped practicing in the shala to practicing at home, I was not anywhere close to doing it unassisted. So when I was starting to do it at home, I was like, well, maybe I just let this go and stop trying. But I was like, I've got energy and time. But the point is, the approach is different, right? I don't just like try 3 times and stop, right? But then you start kind of training for it a little bit, and then I would send Devora a video because she was at home, and then she'd come back and give me tips of things to apply along the way, and that's how we would iterate since we're not in a room together and she couldn't put her hands on me. And then one day it eventually happened. And then the hard part about that particular emotion is that it's dynamic. It's not like you're holding it and trying to like, you can easily sort out what your body is doing. It's moving. So you're trying to remember what happened in that moment and then try to repeat it. But, I approached that pose a little bit differently. I was like, it's the end of my practice. I got through the meditative breathing part. I'm going to go ahead and spend time and do some work here, which I think in some aspects, depending on who the teacher is, it's a little bit poo-pooed to work on something. But it's like, well, that's like at the gym. I work on my deadlifts. I'm trying to get stronger. If you want to be able to kind of make progress, you have to be able to spend some time working on it, and that has to be okay. And I think you just have to decide, like, today my practice is about breathing, and then another day you're like, today I'd like to really, I'll practice my practice like normal, but when I get to this asana, I want to spend time on it.
Yeah. Wow. You just said so much. That was great. The thing that of all of that, though, I'd like to sort of hone in on, and as we move toward a wrap up here, is just that idea that you're working so closely with your teacher, on the poses and the things you're doing in your practice. It's a two-way conversation. I think sometimes in Ashtanga, there can be this like real top-down thing that what the teacher says goes. And I think that when it's really healthy, there's a great feedbacking in between the, coach and athlete, or the teacher and the student, as it were. So I like that a lot, and I'm really happy that you're able to work closely with the teacher. I fear sometimes that people don't have that feeling that they can just, talk and maybe push back even with the teacher, which I think is really healthy and necessary too. So just as we do sort of bring it to a close here, I was just curious what you would say moving forward for those yoga people who were maybe not even interested in strength before. Would you tell them to go ahead and try that would help their practice, or do you think if they're happy with yoga, just stick with that and that is complete?
I mean, if they're happy, then be happy. I think I would advocate for anyone to do strength training. And I guess like I should also mention, like, part of the thing that got me into strength training was actually during yoga teacher training. So non-Ashtanga related. I did a yoga teacher training, oh, I don't know, like 10 plus years ago at Yoga Works. And there's an anatomy segment. That's my other recommendation. Actually, if you don't know a lot about anatomy, go take an anatomy class. It's so informative to daily life, to practice, to the gym, whatever. But the teacher that came in to teach the whatever number of hours of anatomy, she was one who had said something about like resistance training and putting load on your bones, and particularly being beneficial to women, because as you cross kind of your mid 30s, your bone density drops faster than a male body would. And so the idea of like putting your body under load is that you can actually increase your bone density. And so if you increase it earlier, then it's at a higher value when you start declining, right? And I was lucky. I was in my mid 20s at the time, and I was like, this is useful. You know what I mean? Like, forget about the yoga practice for a moment. Like, I think in general, and I guess, yes, the yoga practice puts your body under loads. I would say it's definitely better than nothing. But I'm such an advocate for, going ahead and adding strength training. It can benefit your practice, but it also can just benefit your functionality. And like, as another add-on, as part of the thing that attracted me to bodybuilding is just like you mentioned, like when you're in the gym, you look around, it's not just a bunch of like young people that are like huge. You can see some older folks in really consistent shape. And if you see like there'll be two people the same age, and one person walks hunched over and the other one is upright and has the muscle structure needed and strength to hold themselves upright for a longer period of time. So there's aspects of that and your posture, and being able to just forget about yoga or any kind of aesthetic endeavor, to carry yourself through life. We have one body. So what can we do to make that to get more mileage out of it, for the time that we're here? And so I'm just such an advocate for it. So yeah, if you love yoga and you don't want to do anything else, I mean, but I will always say, like, if you're not opposed to it, like, I think dabbling in strength training and starting to get into it is just a good practice.
Yeah, that's so great. Well, thank you so much. I don't want to keep you all morning, even though I've got a
I could stay all morning.
ton of questions for you. So maybe in the future, a follow up.
I mean, I'm also really surprised that there aren't like naturally more Ashtanga people, specifically Ashtanga because I'm an Ashtangi, but like that like to do the weightlifting aspect or bodybuilding, not the competitive side, because actually, like, one of the common similarities there is like there's so much tapas in your practice. There's so much of that to be able to do the bodybuilding, to have the patience, to see incremental progress in strength. It's funny because my husband is not a yogi, but he's just around me all the time, so he's familiar enough with the series to know when I'm about to end my practice. Like, he's like, oh, okay, you got 10 minutes left. Like, he's got it down. But he said this because he's met a lot of my yoga friends, and then he's met a lot of the bodybuilding community that I've kind of plugged into, but mostly they're competitors, those, which is it's almost a different breed. But he says, it's interesting, the approaches to those very different practices are so similar, but yet the personality archetypes that are attracted to them are kind of different. The bodybuilding community, I mean, competing is aesthetic. It's more of a vain thing. But the part that has in common is all the work leading up to that event to like show the aesthetics. All that work ethic that's there is the same that's required to be an Ashtangi. So I find them very similar in practice. The discipline of getting on your mat when you don't want to the discipline of going to the gym when you when you don't want
It's
to.
Yeah, it's a great observation. I've noticed that when I really started to dig into some of the bodybuilding stuff that, wow, you're like living like a monk and treating this, talk about the tapasya, you're treating this way more seriously than yoga people do. Most yoga people are not taking their diet that seriously. It's like, yeah, I'm a vegetarian, slash carbivore, right? So they're not necessarily treating their food like something that's really fueling their body and thinking
Or they're
about,
avoiding it, right? They're just like kind of starving themselves to stay small for the practice or
yeah,
whatever it is. And it's not to say that there isn't the share of eating disorders in the bodybuilding world as well, because you know it's not even about restricting calories, because sometimes even when you're building you're on a surplus, but there's a lot of tracking, so you're kind of
yeah,
obsessive with your food to make sure whether you're trying to gain, which is did I eat enough, or if you're trying to cut and you're like, is this all I get? It's kind of the part of it, but at least it's more measured and like you're treating it as fuel regardless. Whereas I feel like in the yoga community, I don't know that food is viewed as fuel per se. I think food as fuel is much more of an athlete mentality, right? You
yeah,
have to eat. You can't
that's
not.
right.
You can't avoid it.
And with yoga, I think it's going to be more based on like erroneous information or like superstition, rather than, something that's a little bit more evidence-based that you're going to see just in that training world. So I've been super impressed. And I have to admit that, for a while, I was definitely judgmental of like the average gym guys that, as a yoga person, I didn't see as what they were doing to be really like on my spiritual level. But I've been completely shifted in those views and in hearing some people talk, even like an Arnold Schwarzenegger, and realizing like, wow, this guy is transforming, this person's transforming the entire experience. It really is like a pseudo spiritual experience. Even if that's not baked in with their, code of conduct or whatever, there's something that's
Hmm.
there that just happens through the process, right? That probably does enlighten people. And even if the goal going in, let's say we're more superficial, looking good naked or whatever, it transforms the person, right? Not just what they look like, but who they are. And so I
Yeah, it
agree.
transforms
There's,
it from like, oh, I'm not going to drink. Oh,
yes,
yeah, I'm bringing food to dinner with people. I'm carrying my own food, because and that's the other thing is like it's specifically for competing, because again, the gym is different than like if you're trying to compete, but then it becomes like it's a 24-hour a day, like you're not just training in the gym and then you're done, because then it's like, okay, I have 6 meals to eat and this is what I've allotted for the day. And so suddenly it's almost like it's a practice throughout the day. And I think with my yoga practice is similar too, because you get on your mat, you get off, and then you try to carry that with you the rest of the day. You're not just trying to like, get your run in and be done for the day.
yeah, I think that's exactly right. And that's probably one of the reasons that, you're attracted to both. I know for me, I was attracted to both, that I really saw those things as complementary disciplines. One really was like a mental thing, a yoga thing. One was really like, oh, this is great physical training. I can put like Metallica on and just go for it. And yeah, I like that a lot. Well, awesome. I'm super motivated for tomorrow. Even though I'm probably one of the, overtrainer guys, I'll definitely go in and like train my gains off just because it's like, Saturday morning, I don't want to rest. I want to go to the gym. So I have to like learn how to, I have to learn how to stop, because I have noticed like, wow, if I take a day off, I'm actually like, my body is growing. It has time to recover and grow more.
And you're a
So
little
those,
stronger sometimes. I think
yeah,
that's true even with practice. If I take a couple days off and come back, sometimes I'm like, oh, I thought I was going to be tighter, but actually,
yeah, I
it feels
know.
better.
I think for me, so much of it goes down into like routines. I'm such a routine guy that, I
Me
try to
too.
like get my little, if I have my little cycles down, if I can like control those little patterns in my life, then everything just kind of works out. So I think sometimes that's what I'll do, that even if I'm like hurting my gains, I'm just addicted to the routine of it. Plus, my gym has a really nice sauna, so it's always easy to go for my sauna workout.
Yeah, but that totally makes sense though. Most gym people, even if they're not yogis, tend to be routine oriented.
Yep.
And Ashtangis are obviously very routine oriented. I'm not even
Yes.
a morning person, and yet, I was getting up at 5 o'clock to practice because I liked my practice enough. People
Right.
are like, "Oh, you're such a morning person." I'm like, no, I'm not. Actually, thank you, pandemic. I practice in the afternoon. Except when I drive up to practice with my teacher at once, maybe twice if I'm lucky. Because she's an hour away from me in Sacramento. She's in Grass Valley, so but it's early enough, and I work in tech, so everybody starts meetings later in the morning. So I have time to like drive an hour, practice for almost two, drive back, and then start the workday. But people are like, "Oh, you're such a morning person." I'm like, I'm not a morning person. It's more I'm a yoga person, and it's a requirement to be up in the morning.
Thank you so much, Nika Carlson, for chatting with me today. Nika and I are already planning a future conversation going into more specifics about how yogis can train strength. Please subscribe and rate the podcast. It really helps. Nika is at Nika Yogini on Instagram. I'm Adarsh W on Instagram. And you can find everything I do, including strength and mobility courses, at adarsyoga.com.